We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now your host for the Millennial Roundtable, Chelsey Youman.
Welcome back to the Millennial Roundtable on this beautiful Monday afternoon. I'm so grateful to be with you today and to have a full show scheduled to discuss all types of topics, from cultural millennial news to actual political news and what's going on. Really some interesting developments in the AI world that I always want to keep you apprised on. But before we get there, first joining us this first hour is Patrina Mosley. You have heard her very often on this show. She is an incredible speaker, author, and advocate, and the founder and principal of PPM Consulting. She specializes in everything from women's issues and policy papers to conservative values and beliefs. So thank you for being with us today, Patrina.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
I'm looking forward to our conversation, but before we get there, we also have Richard Lim joining us. He's a speaker, author, historian. He has as many titles as Patrina does, and he's also the president of This American President podcast. He's the host of that as well. He always brings such a wealth of discernment and history to our conversations, which I personally appreciate. Thanks for joining us today, Richard.
Always good to be here, and I never have been called the president of This American President. I like that. I should make business cards.
I like to make up titles as we go sometimes. Richard and I go way back, so I feel free to do that. But we're going to start this show today by talking about an issue that, Patrina, you really brought to the surface for me this weekend. I must confess, I have been drowning in state legislative cycles around the country, working on pro-life legislation as fast and hard as I can. And so I'm not always up to speed what is happening on the influencer world, what's going viral in these cultural moments. So I was really grateful, Patrina, that you brought this first one to my attention. The first issue is entitled, it's a video that went viral and had much cultural commentary, not just from millennials, but from conservatives, Christians, liberals alike. And the title of her video was "A Woman's Love Language is Not Having to Ask." And this is a woman who went onto Twitter and almost had, she was almost trying to give some marital advice, I would describe it, Patrina, saying that, her millennial husband, they have a very equal household. They both work, but more of the work, she was saying in her video, falls on her hands with their 4 children, and that she feels very overwhelmed at home. And even though her husband shows up and is an equal partner, she doesn't want him. That is not enough. She essentially said she doesn't want him to come in and be just an equal partner. She doesn't want him to have to ask her for things like how to pack the kids' lunches or backpacks or what their schedules are for the day. She just wants him to know. And, she ends this video, to be fair to her, saying that after 18 months of intensive coaching and communication with her husband, they finally have, this equal partnership in the home. And I have a lot of opinions about this, but I'm going to open the floor to others first. So Patrina, go ahead. Feel free to just, as always, be as authentic in your response, and feel free to fill in any background that I'm missing, as you were following this more closely than I was.
Yeah. So, you just never know what's going to pop up in the social media world. I mean, especially on Twitter, where it's kind of the town hall and there are multiple conversations taking place. And so you never know what's going to take off and trend. But in a matter of hours, this wife, her rant was that she almost divorced her husband because of household chores not getting done in the house. And so you saw many different responses. You saw a lot of women say, yeah, we've had a very similar experience where we feel like we're carrying an unequal amount of work in the household. And then you had others who were saying, yeah, she needed to divorce this guy. She could do better all on her own. And so it just became chaotic. It was crazy. So I just really thought this needed a Christian response, a balanced Christian response to say, look, men and women are called to live peaceably amongst each other, and particularly, as my husband pointed out, because I got his opinion on this, is Christian husbands are supposed to look for ways to live peaceably with their wives. That's what Christ commands for Christian husbands, but that's God's perfect will for every husband. So, yeah, you want husbands who are conscientious and concerned and are involved in the household that they created. But at the same time, it's like A to Z. We're going to have to divorce? I don't know. We just have a very interesting cultural moment right now where, like, it's okay to divorce over anything if you're unhappy. And that's really the greater point and the greater question here. Like, is it okay to divorce over just being unhappy, over chores, over anything, instead of saying, look, there is no grounds for divorce outside of infidelity, and the rest of the issues, we're going to fight to work it out. And, like you said, in her case, I'm glad she did, but I thought about getting divorced was a kind of a bit of a blowback there.
I am picking up on what you're putting down, Patrina, because first of all, and I'll get into some of these stats after we hear from Richard, but for my first inclination on this did not warrant a Instagram rant. It probably warrants conversations in your home, right? And so this idea is almost this millennial victimhood perspective, which I'm more than happy to call out, as I know both of you are, that we don't always have to have, a martyr. We don't always have to have a victim or a David and Goliath, and the honest truth is millennial men are outstanding fathers. And Richard, you're about to be one. And I'm so excited to say that. I'm so excited for you. And I would love to get your take as you're entering this next phase of you and your wife's life with a young child. Did anything about this video resonate? Was it as off-putting for you as it was for Patrina and I to see her complaining about her husband, who is very involved with the household, but just wasn't doing it quite to her liking?
Yeah, first of all, thank you. I'm very excited about that as well. So there were a couple of things that kind of, I guess, were like the red flags for me in this video. The first, she used a couple of the buzz phrases that the left uses now. She used the term equity, and she also just talked about being seen and all that kind of stuff. And what really struck me was that she gave a specific instance of when her husband, dropped the ball on a chore, and therefore, she got upset. She started seeing it as this pattern of behavior in which he's, putting his work above her work. And what concerns me about that is that, if her husband isn't actually pulling his weight in the home, that's a legitimate issue. That's an issue that, I think any spouse should be able to talk about. But my concern is that she's turning it into this narrative of, okay, my husband is human. He's not perfect. He's not going to get everything right. Lord knows I don't get everything right. But turning it into a narrative of systemic oppression rather than actually just making adjustments and having a discussion. So that, to me, that's kind of the concern, is that she's blowing it up into the systemic issue. But in addition to that, I agree with you. I do not like it when people air their family issues publicly. I just think it's tacky. It creates public leverage over the person you're talking to. I don't think it's healthy, and that's why I'm not a big fan of Meghan Markle, because if you have concerns with your family, deal with it personally. Everyone does, but when you use public pressure like that, whether you intended it or not, I just think it's a tacky move.
I couldn't agree more. When we get back after this short break, we're going to talk about some stats. What type of fathers are millennial men when we get back?
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
In previous commentaries, I've talked about how the 7 million young men who are not working but also not looking for work. Generation Z behind them has 4 million who have been given the term NEETs. NEET stands for Not in Education, Employment, or Training. One article clarifies that some Gen Zers may fall into this category because they are taking care of a family member, but cautions that many have become frozen out of the increasingly tough job market where white-collar jobs are becoming seemingly out of reach. Why has this happened? One political commentator blames how society values certain forms of employment. In many cases, he says, young people have been sent off to universities for worthless degrees which have produced nothing for them at all. He concludes that they would be much better off if they apprenticed to plumbers or electricians. They would be able to look forward to a much more abundant and satisfying life. Too much time has been focused on promoting a college degree as the only reliable path to financial success. Many of the students who enter the university do not finish. Even those that graduate lack the skills they will need in the 21st century. Just as robotics changed the nature of jobs in the factories, artificial intelligence is certain to alter the white-collar job market. Besides the skills gap, there's a will gap. Many of this generation aren't as work-motivated as previous generations. The article laments that Gen Z finds doom scrolling at home more enjoyable than navigating an economy completely different than what their teachers promised them. It is time to rethink how to prepare students for this changing economy. It is also time to challenge pastors, parents, and other leaders to encourage this generation to develop a work ethic. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view on chemical abortion, go to viewpoints.info/chemical-abortion. Viewpoints.info/chemical-abortion.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Well, welcome back to the Millennial Roundtable, where we are discussing a most recent, I don't know what else to call it, but a viral video on social media where a millennial mom was saying that she and her husband split the household fairly evenly. They both work. And I do want to get into that with both of you. And because of that, they actually have a very, she would say, equal house home, or use the word equity, I believe. But that still wasn't enough for women to feel truly loved and seen in their marriages. They don't want their husbands to come asking them for assistance doing things related to the child, things like packing their backpacks correctly, knowing their schedules, what they're going to need for the day in and day out. And the first thing I want to say is millennial dads are incredible dads. And I know this not just because I'm married to an incredible millennial dad, but because the statistics tell me that. My husband, just like I think a lot of millennial men, is very involved at the home. The millennial men are one of the generations most recently to spend the most time with their children. Time spent in recent studies show that millennial dads spend 3 times as much time with their kids compared to their fathers and grandfathers. They also have a more quote unquote egalitarian approach to parenting, meaning that they're present in their child's lives, going to sporting events, picking up from practice, and doing daily chores at home. More involved with things like a significant shift on this list was millennial men have much increased involvement, even doing simple tasks like diaper changing. And that was a big shift. Also, more stay-at-home dads. Nearly 18% of all stay-at-home parents are now millennial dads, compared to 11% in 1989. And part of this is some of the factors would include economic stability or instability. Meant dads are prioritizing family time. There's been a cultural shift where women are out of the home working, which they're saying contributes to reasons the men need to pick up more quote unquote slack at home. So I'm putting some statistics on this because I think it's important to admit how crucial fathers are in their children's lives. And as Patrina, you alluded to earlier, this idea that she was going to divorce her husband over what I would view as a communication issue, figure out how to communicate better that works for you two without bringing up divorce, that would be far more damaging to their children than what currently exists, which sounds to me like in a lot of millennial homes, is a present father. And no, dads don't. I'm raising 3 young boys, and I grew up with all girls. I had one boy cousin on one side, lots of aunts, lots of a sister. And I'm learning quickly, not always perfectly, but quickly, that my sons process very differently than I did as a girl or other girls I know. My husband, men process differently. And so when this woman is complaining essentially that her husband is not her, that's what I picked up. You know, my children and a lot of men I know are not necessarily verbal processors. They might need practice, or they might need you to write things down, or a checklist, or reminders. We're beautifully created differently. That's the type of complementarity that the Bible speaks to, is that we are not equal creations. That God created us both different, but both in his image and both good. And, I, as a woman and wife in my home, bring detail-oriented issues to the forefront that might get missed by the other men in my home. Not because they're worse than me, but because that's not what they're focused on. They're focused on bigger picture things. I also bring a different level of EQ to the home. I'm often responsible for developing that EQ and empathy in my children. And I think those differences are good. Mothers and fathers have to be different because our children need different things from us. They say that the same chemicals released in a child's brain when they're cuddling their mother is the chemical that's released when their dads wrestle them. That's indicative that children need different things from both parents, and that's okay. Egalitarian is not what we're called to scripturally, but complementarity. And I'll get off my soapbox now, but Patrina, I'd love your input on that.
Hey, hand clap emoji right here, okay? Amen, sister. But I will say this. It's amazing how my husband can give me a dissertation about what happened in WCW Monday Night Nitro in 1993, but can't remember to put a trash bag back in the trash can when he empties it. I don't understand it. But like you say, it's communication. And one of the reasons why I believe this post went viral is that it is very symptomatic of this battle between the sexes we've been seeing, men against women, women against men. And so much of, especially women today, the millennial women, they don't financially need a husband as much as they did in the 1950s. They're more educated. They're getting their own money. They're more college-based earners. So it's this entitlement that's kind of been rising among celebrities and cultural influencers saying, I don't need a man. We don't need a man to build a family. You have celebrities like Halle Berry and Angelina Jolie and other big namers adopting kids on their own without a man. So again, I'm just trying to paint this picture of this last decade. We've been seeing this, I don't need a man. And to the point where this person can become a social media influencer and openly say, I consider divorcing my husband over chores. And that's where we're at today. And then the tweet went viral, and it's like 150,000 likes at this point and over 118 million views. And the video was captured with this quote from her, and the person called it brilliant. Brilliant. There's nothing brilliant about leaving a stable home environment for your 4 kids that you claim you have and giving them a fatherless home. How is that brilliant? So I absolutely wholeheartedly agree with you, and just thought this was an interesting social phenomenon here that we're clapping like dolphins and like, oh yes, divorce your husband over chores. This is great. This is where we've come to. And I was pretty shocked by it. But I like you said, I love your answer, and that's the Christian response we should have back to the culture.
What about you, Richard? Any final thoughts?
I am very impressed by your husband's WCW knowledge. I think that's great. Well, my wife would probably say the same thing about a number of...
Well, it looks like we lost Richard, but he is excited, I know, to be having he and his wife entering parenthood for the first time. He will be a millennial dad, and I'm sure he's taking notes, Patrina, as you and I speak about this right now. I will say one last thing. You mentioned the battle of the sexes, and I didn't even think about that until you said it. But when we look at culturally right now, it started in my mind with the toxic masculinity trend. This would be a variation of it where, it's not to say that she didn't have validity in needing to resolve some things in her home with her husband, or that her husband shouldn't ignore her and listen to her and value and cherish her as she respects and cherishes him. You know, there's a duality there. But the bigger point being that you're seeing this bifurcation between women saying, what you said, I don't need a man to even raise my own kids or to have kids, with the invention of IVF now, freezing their eggs. I am woman, hear me roar. And I think it's hopefully just a cultural blip or more of a moment after the presidential campaign where we all remember, you know, young women, I think probably Gen Z, but maybe some millennials, who shaved their heads in solidarity and said they were swearing off men. And that was so cliche and frustrating to me as someone who has followed politics my entire life and works in politics, that of course that election resulted in a man versus woman demographic breakdown and PR stunt. I hated that. It should have been about the issues. But I do think we're hitting the nail on the head here. We need to continue to eradicate victimhood from the millennial mindset. We need to continue to point back to scripture and to two-parent households, to love and marriage, just these foundations of the family that society has systemically over decades now attempted to eradicate, Patrina. And that's where I'm always going to land when it comes to something like this.
I'm back, by the way. I don't know what happened.
Oh, hey, Richard. Okay, in our last minute before break, tell us what you got.
Well, I'm just worried about the kind of impact that this has on a marriage where, you know, divorce oftentimes can be a self-fulfilling prophecy, like a lot of horrible things. And the fact that that is ever into play in an interaction, I mean, look, I have been the husband that has, I'll just say it, no one's perfect. I'm not perfect. There are times when I've screwed something up, and it would be horrible if that word was just thrown around there as if it's just a basic option rather than marriage being a sacred trust before the Lord. And so that's where we have gotten. I think it's a terrible effect on people, on marriages.
That's a great point. Well, in a world where, Richard, unfortunately, you know, the permanency of marriage and no-fault divorce starting in the 80s, which took a huge hit at that, millennials are not only have lower percentages of likelihood to even get married in the first place. I do think their divorce rates are down from the previous generation, perhaps because they're taking longer to get married. I'm not exactly sure what the sociologists account for that, but these are trends to say, the church being the church would be that we are discipling on marriage. What does it look like? What does the Bible have to say about a godly biblical marriage and communication and selflessness? That's the core tenet of all relationships. When we get back, we're going to be turning to some other breaking headlines, so don't go anywhere.
Many years ago, they began saying that we live in the information age. Well, today there is so much information coming at us from every direction. The hardest thing is to discern which issues are really important and how can I make a positive impact without wasting my time trying to figure out accurate information. Let me give you a suggestion to help with that. Visit pointofview.net. Look at the tabs across the top. Find the one named Viewpoints. Kirby Anderson and others on our team are constantly watching for news to identify those issues that you really need to know about. They boil things down in a brief summary, and then you can decide if it's something on which you want to learn more and get involved. Again, when you go to pointofview.net, click on Viewpoints, you'll see exactly what I mean. You'll see the issues that we are covering right now. And when you like what you see, I honestly think you will, you can slide on over, enter your email, and get them automatically sent to your inbox each day. That's it. Take a minute now, be informed. Pointofview.net, click on Viewpoints. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, Chelsey Youman.
Well, welcome back to the Millennial Roundtable. Don't forget you can go to pointofview.net and read up on our articles and topics for discussion today at any time. You can also like us on Point of View Radio on Facebook. Like and comment. We'd love to hear from you. I'm continuing for these next two segments with Richard and Patrina, and we're going to turn now our discussion to the World Economic Forum. I've always got my eye on them. I think we all should be paying attention to what the World Economic Forum is doing, as they are having an increasingly, I would say, inflated power role in our world structures today. And one of the things that they've done, I would say fairly successfully, is accurately predict, I'm sure this is just a coincidence, but major world calamities. One being they had multiple simulations of a pandemic, for instance, I think in 2015 and again, maybe 2018. And then sure enough, COVID happened and that simulation ended up not being a hypothetical after all. Well, the World Economic Forum released their 2025 report on it's a report or paper. It's the most likely to present a material crisis on a global scale in 2025. What is the paper? The paper basically says this is the highest risk of a global issue to happen. And on that list was a cybersecurity threat and cyber attack on our infrastructure. And I want to talk about this not only because they accurately predicted COVID, but because they really took a lot of interviews to get here. I mean, they interview thousands and thousands of quote unquote experts from across the world, including business leaders and risk experts to come up with their top three risks. The first was a state-based armed conflict, which we're already seeing lots of wars, a geoeconomic confrontation. I'm not even entirely sure what that means, but they're of course pointing to President Trump and his tariffs as a hyper risk analysis there. But the one I want to discuss today with both of you guys is they are predicting a cyber attack that could take down the infrastructure. Now, I wanted to talk to you about this first, Richard. We'll go to you. When I hear that, I don't automatically think, well, what does that mean for corporations and businesses, which is what the bulk of this article discusses. I think, what does that mean for us as humans and Americans who rely significantly on our infrastructure daily to operate, and that's to do things like electricity to cook food, to heat water, for instance, on the way that we get our groceries and all the logistics behind that. So, Richard, did anything stand out to you about this report? And feel free to talk about the World Economic Forum more broadly as well, because I know you have no shortage of opinions there.
Well, it's always a bit unnerving when the elites gather together and their machinations start and whatnot. I would say that it's a wake-up call. When you look back at the biggest surprise attacks on the United States that we've experienced as a nation, the nation was truly flat-footed, whether it was Pearl Harbor, whether it was 9/11. I think for those of us who remember 9/11, September 10th, 2001, Middle East terrorism was probably the last thing on all of our minds, and the world changed in an instant. The fact is that you have a brave new world. Right now, you have so many technological advancements that are so hard to keep up with, but all of those advancements represent an opportunity for bad actors to exploit them, to gather information, to attack people, to steal identities. I mean, there are so many threats. You have state-sponsored cyber espionage. You could have an attack that really affects our supply chains. We've seen what happens when supply chains are.
Yes, when they're impacted and things like groceries aren't delivered on time or grocery stores go empty, or we saw shortages in the months after COVID, Patrina. So what stood out to you about the World Economic Forum's analysis?
The World Economic Forum, they always stand out to me. So whenever they're saying something, I'm like, oh, Lord, here we go. And like you said, they accurately predicted a pandemic that would be unleashed upon the world. They're making predictions right now about another type of virus that could be an epidemic. And so, it kind of makes you wonder, why is it that the world's smartest, richest, elitist gets to go to these conventions, and there are some side secret conventions that go on as well, and they get to tell us here's what's going to happen, and then it happens. Mm-hmm. And I would call that a little suspect, because unless you're Jonathan Cahn or another Messianic Jewish writer whose name I can't think of right now, unless you're one of those people operating with the Spirit of God, I don't trust it. And we've already seen, like you said, inflation, just stores just not having stuff. And it kind of felt like this experiment to see how much control would people give up of their lives? How much of their conscious rights would they give up if their safety and livelihood was threatened? And so knowing what we know about the end times, which is, the greatest predictor written ever is the book of Revelations that tells us there will be a time when you will be forced to receive a mark that will allow you to buy and sell. If you don't get it, you won't be able to have your livelihood. And so this kind of felt like an experiment. I do think a cyber security attack is very likely, only because I feel like we've had a few of those already. I mean, maybe some of you remember with the flights, American Airlines, all the major airline systems here in the U.S. just kind of went out for a day. And they said it was a cyber attack on, I believe, the Microsoft Corporation systems that they use. So, okay, we know that all of our airlines are operating on the same system produced by Microsoft. And with one cyber attack, all the planes had to be grounded. And so there's some practical takeaways there. Like, not every plane system we have in America should be on the same system. But it's also interesting that we keep getting these little testers to see what will happen after the World Economic Forum makes these predictions. It's a little interesting.
I'm back. I'm not sure. I think I got cut off at some point. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, no, I was just saying that if you look throughout American history, we've always been flat-footed whenever there was a big attack. On September 10th, 2001, no one was thinking about Islamic terrorism, and yet that was the dominant issue that lasted for years afterwards because of the 9/11 attacks. And right now, we're in a brave new world. I mean, we have so many technological advancements, everything from AI, Internet of Things. I mean, there's so many new technologies out there that we're rushing to just try to understand. Meanwhile, bad actors are using those new technologies to exploit vulnerabilities. And you have everything from, state-sponsored cyber espionage, corporate espionage. You have just standard phishing attacks. I mean, there are so many new vulnerabilities, and it's likely we'll probably be flat-footed in the event of a major attack. And those things are going to affect everything. Supply chains, they're going to affect, where we work. I think it's incumbent on every single person to be as informed as possible on these type of things. And, to even take the initiative to talk to the IT person at your office and know what the vulnerabilities are and what the capabilities are, the cybersecurity capabilities that we have. And so, it's the idea of hygiene, cyber hygiene and cybersecurity that I think, my wife works in the IT world. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. My wife works in the IT world, and she knows so much more than I do, and she tries to convince me all the time, hey, this isn't as difficult as you're making it to be. You just got to learn a little bit every day, and you'll understand more than most people.
I think that's such a good practical way to think about it. And I want to get into a little bit of that practicality in a few minutes. But, to put a finer point on this conversation, what we're alluding to is outside of traditional war, the fact that China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran in this article are pointed out as all capable, all sophisticated, and all advanced enough to undergo a type of cyber attack. The question is when or how much provocation would be required for that to happen. And while the article in World Economic Forum, of course, focused more on the business aspects, I think what you're alluding to, Richard, too, is that we have personal responsibility. What you're saying is we've had this increased dependency naturally, instead of being, making our own food and growing our own food and being farmers and self-sufficient completely, almost entirely as a home, we now work outside of the home and are very dependent on everything working. And if that were to break, and there's actually an Obama movie on Netflix that he made about this, which for me, it's called Leave the World Behind, and that was produced. The Obamas were behind that production. And it's this idea that the entire grid goes down, the entire grid is attacked, and it would be a mass casualty event. And that's not just in this movie. Tucker Carlson also recently did some interviews about what would happen if our grid were to go down from a cyber attack. And they're calling it a mass casualty event. And I say that not to fearmonger, but I say that because we want to talk about being prepared on this show, bringing these issues to the forefront. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back after this break.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Well, welcome back to the Millennial Roundtable, where we are talking about the World Economics Forum's most recent prediction regarding a cybersecurity attack to really anywhere but the United States. And because they were so right in their other predictions, I thought it'd be good for us now to turn to how can we prepare for this? It's one of the reasons I want to highlight this on the show first of all, Patrina, I wish that our leadership in our country would highlight this issue more. You know, we would never want to show our hand that there's any security threats or that we're not prepared or equipped or falling flat-footed, as Richard so aptly said last segment. But they could be doing more to say, hey, everybody, you need to be prepared as we're in this increasing spiral in the Middle East, and there's all these proxy wars and in Ukraine, and tensions with China and tariffs escalating, that, we should be prepared. And what does that look like if we were to be attacked through a cyber attack, especially particularly to our grid? And what does that mean? And I would think it would be on our leadership to let us as Americans know that, we get really comfortable here at home. We're landlocked. We're not abroad in these wars, physically at least. But this would certainly be a way for those wars to find a way to us. And so what that would mean, I would say, Patrina, I would start with basic necessities. If your electricity goes out, you have a power outage, what are the things you notice first? In Texas, when the power goes out, you either notice it's really hot outside, it's really cold outside. You need water and you need food and you need a way to cook it and to access that. Patrina, does anything about that resonate with you?
I mean, that sounds like you should be a really good prepper and stop making fun of them.
Yes,
that's what that sounds like.
Which millennials, we made fun of the preppers, and I think we're all starting to wake up and say there's a little bit more to it than we realized.
I think so. So I think that's on the practical side. Yeah, I we can have a humorous spirit about the preppers, but in reality, there will come a time where we are in nation against nation, wars against wars, kingdom against kingdoms, as Jesus put it in Matthew 24. Those times are going to come. Whether or not we're going to be here or not, we don't know. But you can get prepared. And I think on another practical level from our leaders, what would be a great idea is if President Trump, with, I would say, his favorite House member, Thomas Massey, not so favorite for those who don't know, that's not his favorite House member, to do like a town hall session, a info session for the American people to say, this is what the world looks like today when it comes to war. Wartime is not how it used to be in 1960. Wartime is very different than how it was for your uncles and your grandfathers. Today, war is cybersecurity. Today, war can be social media. Today, war is food supply. It is energy consumption, etc. And the reason why I say Thomas Massey is because he's written a book and is living the life of being off-grid, knowing how to grow your own food, knowing how to be, off the grid, how to produce your own power, how to protect yourself in the cyber world, things like that. He has become an expert on and is living it, which I give him respect for that. He's out in the middle of nowhere with no broadband. So, and he built his own energy efficient house. So I'm like, that's actually living all of this for yourself, which I appreciate. So I think something like that would be good for the American people to kind of get an update of, this is what current warfare looks like today. Here's the proactive steps America is taking to be the forefront and the leaders on this. And at the same time, protect your personal identities, your cybersecurity mechanisms as we face off and take off enemies in the front. So
well said, Patrina. Well said. And to prepare us, not just because it's possible that it could happen, but because, as President Trump has been so adamant about in the last few months, there is a technology arms race, and he wants the United States to lead that. And he's speaking on the AI front, but I would hope that Richard, it would also include protections, safety nets, making sure our systems are updated and not woefully outdated, which are very expensive, by the way. You worked in the federal government for a long time. And Richard, you and I both, did my time there in D.C. in the White House under the Bush administration. And they had the oldest Microsoft computers I've ever seen in my life at the time. So, there's, for me, Richard, this disconnect between what does it really mean to say we want to be leading the world in technology, and then to look at our federal government's budget and say, well, that's exorbitantly expensive, and that type of infrastructure and insulation would require a lot of taxpayer funding, and what's the responsibility of the government to make those moves, or even feasibility, Richard?
Well, there was I'm not going to name the entity that I worked for in the government, but when I was there, they still had internal message systems that had basically been there since like the 60s and 70s. I mean, it was bad. And I worked there about 12 years ago. So, yeah, it's one of those things that I think to some extent you're always going to be behind the curve, but I do think that, as I was saying, my wife works in the IT world, and she is somebody that's always trying to dispel the mystery of these kind of things. A lot of people, I mean, look, I studied history and political science in college. I'm not the most IT savvy person in the world, but my wife didn't study IT either. She studied political science, and she's now in the IT world. And I think a lot of it is just dispelling the mystery and removing the mental block that you cannot understand these things. You can. There are books you can read about this kind of stuff. There are books about cybersecurity that are written for laymen that you could literally go out and read and understand. And there are people that you can talk to that you can ask questions and learn about. So, again, I think that it is incumbent on everyone to invest a little bit of time in that and to think through, and, just even to know who are the authorities that I should reach out to in the event of a cyber attack. What law enforcement? I mean, the FBI has an internet crime complaint center that you could, go to reach out to talk about this, to report anything that you see. So, yeah, it's one of these things where I think there needs to be kind of a mental block released from our mind to think that we can't understand and play a role in having better cyber hygiene, as they call it nowadays.
You raised such an interesting point. I've never heard that phrase before, but as someone who is also very deficient at technology, that's a good thought, because it does feel so impossible and difficult to understand so many times. But I think, what you alluded to just a minute ago, Patrina, is part of this mental block I'm raising today. This issue is because I do think the older generations, or the generations who have gone before, grew up in a world that was less dependent. And so for them, it's less intimidating to figure out what that means. Where do we start? Whereas millennials or Gen Z or younger, we've lived in a very dependent world where we're very interconnected to all the systems. And I'm saying that's to our detriment, and can be a little bit daunting for millennials to remove their own mental block on what does it mean to be prepared, and to have some survival skills and to work. And any final thoughts on that topic, Patrina?
Yeah, actually, thank you. So just to give people, our audience, like kind of a visual of what the cyber war could look like and what's currently taking place. For example, right now, China will employ what they call 50-cent soldiers, meaning they're going to pay soldiers like that. They use their prison system, and they pay these people who are behind bars 50 cents a tweet to tweet out Chinese propaganda. And that's a part of their warfare strategy. So now you have American kids or kids from New Zealand or wherever the world is, and they're accessing internet, and they bump into a tweet and propaganda about, here's how great China is. Let me tell you, I see it all the time. And someone's doing a quick video about this new and latest, greatest car, this newest, latest, greatest city in China, and how Chinese culture and Chinese technology is so much better. It's all a part of propaganda to get people's minds thinking that China is a place of innovation and instead of being a lack of freedom. And that's part of warfare today. So we got to have our eyes open.
We do. Thank you, Patrina and Richard, for being with us. Don't forget to go to pointofview.net and find their bios, support their work. As always, we appreciate y'all.
The Bible tells us not to worry, and yet there is a lot of worrying stuff in our world today. Thankfully, the Bible doesn't stop at telling us not to worry. God gives us a next step. He says we need to pray. But sometimes even knowing what to pray can be difficult. And that is why Point of View has relaunched our Pray for America movement, a series of weekly emails to guide you in prayer for our nation. Each week, you'll receive a brief update about a current issue affecting Americans, along with a written prayer that you can easily share with others. We'll also include a short free resource for you in each email so you can learn more about the issue at hand. Will you commit to pray for America? Go to pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner at the top of the page to subscribe. Again, that's pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in America. Point of View will continue after this.
I do appreciate Point of View and what you folks are doing. You really are doing a great job to educate and to help Christian folks do a better job to honor Christ in all that we do.
My husband and I are your supporters. We just really appreciate the show and the people you bring on.
I just want to commend you guys on your program. I love listening to you. It's a blessing. Been listening to you for several years. Your program has helped my family see current events and elections and politics through the eyes and the principles of Scripture. And that's been enlightening, and we're trying to pass that on to others.
I want to say, first of all, that I really enjoyed the Millennial Roundtable, and I love the program altogether. I think Kirby is great, and I really appreciate all of y'all, all that y'all do, and the truth that y'all put out.
Hey, great show. Love all your comments and what you're talking about.
Thanks again for what you do.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now your host for the Millennial Roundtable, Chelsey Youman.
Well, welcome back to the Millennial Roundtable for our second hour. If you did not listen to the first, we had Richard Lim and Patrina Mosley with us, and we had an incredible discussion. So please go back. You can go to pointofview.net and watch our discussion, or even watch live on Facebook at Point of View Radio, where you can like and comment. So feel free to leave your comments. We do love to hear from you. We are turning now the second hour, all new panelists. We've got Ethan Watson. He is a writer, student, tutor, and a contributor to Young Voices. Thanks for joining us today, Ethan.
Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be on.
I'm glad you're here. And correct me if I'm wrong, but are you in law school right now?
I just committed. I'm going to law school this fall, so I'm very excited about that.
Awesome. My deepest congratulations and sympathies as a former law student myself. We're proud of you, Ethan. You always bring such a great voice and perspective to our show. Also joining us this hour is Alyssa Sonnenburg. She is with the Illinois Family Policy Institute, or Family Institute, and I'm sure in full swing in session right now. Thanks for joining us and taking your time out of your busy season, Alyssa.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
It's going to be a full show today. Right now, we're going to turn to Elon Musk news, but not the news you're thinking of. He's been making a lot of headlines, as always, in the last week. But I found a very obscure article in the Times of India, which is how you know it's a topic that the media has been burying, because that's where I had to go to find this one. So I'm going to bring that one to the forefront, and we're going to talk a little bit on his views on humanity and AI. And then we'll turn to another discussion on what they're calling the newest form of eugenics, or genetic selection in the IVF process. It'll be a bit of a continuation of an ongoing discussion we like to have on the Millennial Roundtable on the ethics around IVF and some of the practices there, but also some, I would say, disturbing trends as well. And then we'll also discuss the justices and their hearing last week on whether or not Planned Parenthood can be defunded, and why. So we'll have all these discussions and more, but we're going to dive right in on Elon Musk. This is really the impetus of this conversation started with, as usual, all news, a tweet from Elon Musk last week, which when I saw, I immediately was just very shocked to hear him say this. But then when I went and did some digging here, which led me to the Times of India, this has been a repeat concern that he's voiced before. And so it wasn't necessarily what his initial tweet, it didn't mean what I thought it meant. But here is the tweet. The tweet is, as I mentioned, this is Elon Musk. As I mentioned several years ago, it increasingly appears that humanity is a biological bootloader for digital superintelligence. And when I saw that, I thought, really the implication when I look up what a bootloader is, it's for any type of software. You kind of have a code that's like the number one, phase one code, and then the entire software can launch off that code. And so what he's saying is that humanity is this, prototype, this number one code that you need, that can essentially be dissipated after that. And the implication when I went and looked at this is really a repeat statement from something he said in 2019 when he was at the World AI Conference in Shanghai in 2019. And he was debating with an AI co-founder and specialist at that time. And during the discussion, he expressed serious concerns that he echoes constantly about the unchecked growth of AI. And he warns that humanity could be playing a temporary role in its development and machine intelligence. And he continues to think there needs to be regulations on it. Now, this is a heavy topic, but it's one I don't want us to shy away from just because it involves technology. I think that Elon Musk has been very clear. His solution to this idea that humans are going to be made obsolete, irrelevant, or even taken over by AI. One, there's validity to those concerns, but two, his solution is a problem. And his solution is, in order for humanity to compete with this super intelligence, we have to join it. And essentially, it's this post-humanist idea that we've got to integrate technology into our bodies, into our minds. He's doing this through Neuralink, where they are transplanting these links into human bodies and helping them get their memories back, for instance. So there's lots to unpack here. We can go anywhere y'all want with it. But Alyssa, I'm going to start with you. Were you shocked by his comments, and do you have any thoughts?
I honestly wasn't completely shocked by the comments that Elon Musk was making. Obviously, we know his branding. We know his mind. He loves SpaceX with Tesla. He's into these Tesla robots now. I don't know if you've seen those. I've seen some robot dogs as well that are in production. So AI and really crazy technological ideas have kind of always been part of Musk's entity, I guess you could say. So it doesn't surprise me that he's very much so on the forefront of some of these concerns, what he's seeing as possibly a developer coming out of AI technology. And I have to say, I am not an AI fan. I think it's weird. It creeps me out that some things can be fake, some things can be real. I remember hearing story of how easy it is for scammers to take your voice and contact an elderly family member of you and pretend that you're in trouble and you need help and you need money. So there are definite concerns with AI becoming bigger and more dangerous, especially when it comes to how it affects our children, how it affects their schooling, etc. But I'm not so sure, like you were saying, Chelsey, as to his solution that, if we can't beat it, we join it. I don't think that's the right call here.
That's a good point. I do want to get into that a little bit more, but Ethan, your first thoughts?
Definitely. I think with Elon Musk, he's a very complicated figure, and I think we could play a game like good Elon, bad Elon here. I think Elon is very pro-humanity in some ways, like when he talks about the survival of the human race by colonizing Mars. I think that's a very optimistic way. He's not like one of these environmentalists that say, well, it'd be better if humanity just to, cease to exist because it would save the planet. He breaks from the mold in that respect, so I got to give him props there. But it is kind of concerning, some of the implications of Neuralink and AI. And I think what we really need to keep in mind with AI is that it is an important tool, just like, the Industrial Revolution. Like, no one would sit here and say, the advent of the tractor was bad because now we don't plow fields by hand anymore, for example. So if AI is used properly to reduce our labor load while maintaining and enhancing the parts of us that make us human, the arts, literature, even the joys of learning new things and engaging with one another face to face, that's a positive good. But I'm really glad that Elon is calling attention and using his bully pulpit to get out in front of the world and say, look, there's a real danger here that AI is going to overtake us. And I don't think it's going to be a Skynet situation like in the Terminator franchise. That's what people think when they think evil artificial intelligence, right? They're going to send robots out and kill us all or something. I think it's more likely that slowly over time we'll see the parts of us that make us human, our relationships, our capacity to adapt, we'll see that eroded and chipped away by our reliance on AI. And I already catch myself doing that. Like if I have a question now, I'm studying for an exam or something, I just ask AI to give me the formula or help me do it, or even, help my writing now and then. And so you really got to be intentional and not use AI as a crutch to replace some of these parts that make us unique and human.
That's so well said. That was my initial response as well, Ethan, was to say, we have this entire tech industry constantly, when you hear them speak, talk about humans as if we're at a deficit, as if we're just, you hear about the new superhuman or the next generation of human. And that's incredible to me because the human body and mind is so advanced. We don't even understand it yet half the time. More on this conversation when we get back after this break.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
In previous commentaries, I've talked about how the 7 million young men who are not working but also not looking for work. Generation Z behind them has 4 million who have been given the term NEETs. NEET stands for Not in Education, Employment, or Training. One article clarifies that some Gen Zers may fall into this category because they are taking care of a family member, but cautions that many have become frozen out of the increasingly tough job market where white-collar jobs are becoming seemingly out of reach. Why has this happened? One political commentator blames how society values certain forms of employment. In many cases, he says, young people have been sent off to universities for worthless degrees which have produced nothing for them at all. He concludes that they would be much better off if they apprenticed to plumbers or electricians. They would be able to look forward to a much more abundant and satisfying life. Too much time has been focused on promoting a college degree as the only reliable path to financial success. Many of the students who enter the university do not finish. Even those that graduate lack the skills they will need in the 21st century. Just as robotics changed the nature of jobs in the factories, artificial intelligence is certain to alter the white-collar job market. Besides the skills gap, there's a will gap. Many of this generation aren't as work-motivated as previous generations. The article laments that Gen Z finds doom scrolling at home more enjoyable than navigating an economy completely different than what their teachers promised them. It is time to rethink how to prepare students for this changing economy. It is also time to challenge pastors, parents, and other leaders to encourage this generation to develop a work ethic. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view on chemical abortion, go to viewpoints.info/chemicalabortion. Viewpoints.info/chemicalabortion. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Well, welcome back to the Millennial Roundtable, where Ethan, Alyssa, and I are doing our best to break down some comments made by Elon Musk about AI's development and essentially this fear that AI is going to become a superintelligence, as he says, and essentially make humans obsolete. And his solution is transhumanism, which may surprise you. It's the same solution that you're hearing out of the World Economic Forum and many of the elite technology circles that talk about this idea of for a human to continue to compete on a basis with technology, we have to merge with it. And that sounds as sci-fi as you think. They're using technology for now artificial wombs. This is no longer just an experiment. They've done it with lambs. They've successfully, they're trying to transplant babies from their mother's wombs who maybe have a complication and put them in an external artificial womb, and that child can grow, and they grew successfully lambs over the last few years out of that. There's all kinds of ways that technology is being utilized to really, I don't know if reinvent is the right word, but take over roles traditionally played by humans. And even though Elon Musk is calling this out and saying this is a problem, his solution is the same, and that is merge with technology. It's transhumanism. I would argue that the solution should be, which is often not the case, often too far, the government is too far behind technology and advancements until a problem is already created. But I would argue that regulation is in order. It's a deeply unregulated industry. And I think for several reasons. One, it's complex. It's difficult to understand. Paying experts to draft the regulations alone and who can understand this and come testify would be exorbitantly expensive. And two, the technology lobby, I will start with you, Ethan, is very well funded. And so to even get regulations off the board means going up against Silicon Valley here. And so where do you see solutions, or do you see any solutions lie? And feel free to take this where you'd like, Ethan.
Well, this is certainly a issue that should be at the forefront of the regulatory agenda. I, generally am a free market guy. I like free enterprise. I like seeing the innovations that it comes up with. But this is an area of public policy where I think there does need to be some regulation for the good of our species, frankly. And it's especially hard to get this passed because this transhumanist thing, it's not actually new. Even back in the 1800s, Nietzsche was talking about the Übermensch, right? How we can overcome our human nature via technology. And this is a very entrenched idea, the idea of homo deus, right? Humans can become as gods, augmented by AI and other technology. And it's been around forever. And this idea that humanity is something to be transcended is so dangerous. I would counter that historical example with something even further back, which is we all remember when Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, trying to become all-knowing, and it didn't really work out so well for them. And so I think we should use that as a cautionary tale. And absolutely, let's use our institutions that we have to try and combat this tendency to, have humanity transcend itself. And it would just make the world such a less interesting place, right? Like if everybody has all of the knowledge of the world in their heads immediately via Neuralink or something, right, where you can see where this is going, there would be no need for us to have this conversation. There'd be no need for anyone to tune into a radio show like this because they already have all the knowledge, all the information that they could want. You could totally see how this will erode our social fabric. And if government exists for anything, it exists to preserve our social fabric in our society. So absolutely some measures need to be passed to regulate and monitor this at the federal level.
I couldn't agree more. To your point, there is nothing new under the sun. There have been variations of humanity always trying to create their own gods from the beginning of time. And that's, in fact, what I would call this. Even Elon Musk refers to AI technology as a god. And then we have the billionaire who's trying to remain young forever. He even alludes to AI as being, the created becomes the creator, and how much more that makes us as humans, in his words, a divinity, because we were able to create this superhuman intelligence. That's demonic. I would like to call that out first and foremost. But at the end of the day, the common thread between transhumanism, and I would even argue the trans movement and the LGBT movement, is that humanity is not enough. I mean, they're always saying that humanity, we've got to become bigger, better, different than we were created. But what the Bible alludes to, Alyssa, is that God created us and said we are good. We are created in his image, in the image of the living God. And no technology can even begin to compete with that. Although the lie that's being sold by the enemy is that AI is some big answer in superhuman intelligence we've never had before, when in fact the complexity of the human brain, the human eyeball, the human emotions, our relationships, even our ability to analyze ethics, which we're doing right now on this show, no technology can accomplish any of that. And so to say that to become the better versions of ourselves, we have to really eliminate that which makes us human, in my mind, is a form of a eugenics argument. Alyssa.
Absolutely. I love how you drew it back to a biblical argument, because I don't think I could improve on anything Ethan was saying. He said that so well when it comes to the need for regulation. But when you take it back to a biblical perspective, we are made in the image of God. And what that means is not that we are like God in that we are little g gods. That's the lie that Satan tried to use in the garden when he was tempting Eve. And then when Adam fell as well, that you will be like God because you will know good and evil. That's not what it means when we're made in his image. What it means is that we have an emotion, an intellect, and a will. We have the ability to reason. Technology does not have the ability to reason. Technology, like you were saying, Chelsey, does not have the ability to analyze ethical boards, ethical arguments. And with this AI technology, with the Neuralink specifically, there are a lot of ethical issues that we don't know about. We don't know what it's going to be like to experiment on people. What are the ethics behind that on the first participants in this experimentation? What is it going to do to our brains? Is there going to be inflammation? Is there going to be diseases that are created because of this? There are a lot of ethical quandaries to this. And like you were saying, Chelsey, our uniqueness as human beings has nothing to do with technology. It has everything to do with the fact that we are uniquely and beautifully created in the image of a divine God.
Well said. Well said. Well, I'm certainly thinking when I look at it in terms of the political landscape, which I'm always doing because I work in the pro-life policy world, and I'm thinking of who are the interest groups engaged who can really do something about this. And I actually think human dignity starts with the pro-life movement. It's what we're alluding to, which is we are created in the image of God. We don't have to transcend humanity. There's no such thing, I believe, even in some form of human transcendence. It is enough to believe in Christ, and we will transcend someday into eternity. And you're going to either do that at the foot of the throne of God, or you're going to do that somewhere else. And that's what real transcendence is. And so the rest is noise and lies, but we're going to always talk about it on the show. I do want to turn now to a different form. I love what you said there, Alyssa, the uniqueness of humanity, because our next topic really is going to dive into continuation in a different way, this ethics conversation of, picking and choosing which humans are enough and which need to be, quote unquote, improved upon. And that's through IVF. And I'm going to start by saying I'm deeply sympathetic to couples who desire to have a family, desire to be parents, desire to have children, and can't for whatever fertility issue that they're facing or whatever reason they're facing. And it's a travesty in a world where, I don't think children are valued enough. For those who actually do value children and want to have them to not be able to is truly a grieving process and a really difficult thing. And so my goal in having this discussion is to start there and say it is good to want to have children, to value children, and to want to parent. But to do that ethically is important, and to do that in a way that does as little of damage as possible to human embryos that are created, to do that ethically is really important. And so I'm going to be talking about a category of IVF that I would say is not safe and, carefully done with the intent to save lives. It's done with the intent to pick and choose. And this article comes on nationalreview.com, and it's entitled Eugenics Gets a Modern Facelift with Investment from Peter Thiel. So when we get back after our break in just a minute, we're going to dive into this. What does that even mean, eugenics? But it's essentially this discussion that started with an article that was published in the New York Times. Should human life be optimized? And I think that's going to sound reminiscent of the discussion we just had, Ethan and Alyssa, where we're talking about optimizing humans. And it's a controversial op-ed written by Anna Sussman. And essentially it has a little girl on the front of the cover, and she's playing with a toy, and it says her parents selected her for her help. And hers wanted a girl, and points to another toddler in this article. And they're describing this practice in the IVF world of genetic screening that goes far beyond, is the baby going to be healthy or a boy or a girl, and getting information down to eye color, selecting based on eye color, selecting a child based on their genetic disposition for their IQ and intelligence levels. It's an entire screening process that's had a ton of funding, a $25 billion fund that it's raised to be able to screen children for all of those types of genetic factors. And we're going to break this down when we get back after this short break.
It was not that long ago that censorship appeared to be almost inevitable. Free speech was being attacked and strangled in many places. And some of us wondered if this was the end. But now, many feel a new sense of hope, a chance for a fresh dawn. Let me caution you, now is not the time to relax. It's a time to press forward, to use this fresh opportunity to proclaim and learn how to apply truth to current issues. By the fact you're here, listening right now, that tells me that you recognize the vital role Point of View plays as a voice of truth. For more than 50 years, we've informed and equipped people who have made a real difference. And when you give to Point of View today, you breathe life into what can be a new golden era for the truth. Please, take a moment right now and invest in truth. Visit pointofview.net or give it 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net. Click in now or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, Chelsey Youman.
Well, welcome back to the Millennial Roundtable, where I am joined by Ethan Watson and Alyssa Sonnenburg this hour. Don't forget to go to pointofview.net, where you can read our articles and topics today. Go back and listen last hour as well to Richard and Patrina as we discussed lots of current events and social media trends happening right now. We are going to turn our discussion today to an article really that started in the New York Times, but I thought that National Review had an outstanding op-ed that kind of laid out the ethical considerations, and it is regarding IVF. And as I mentioned in the last segment, aside from being very compassionate towards couples who are trying to have children and can't, I think it's important to still be able to talk about the ethical considerations of IVF practices, but also be aware of ongoing trends. And right now we've been talking about the use of technology almost to dehumanize. And I'm going to put this in that type of category where technology has been invented to really screen, more than screen just genetically for what a couple can expect in terms of having a girl or a boy or certain eye colors. But there is a first state-of-the-art startup company that is dedicated to advancing artificial reproductive technology. And it's a first-in-kind pre-implantation genetic testing. And what it does is it can even sequence a child's entire genome. It can sequence a child's DNA. So essentially a couple can sort of say, it's more than screening. It's saying we want our child an egg that has this amount of intelligence. They screen for predisposition for types of disease. And the person who started and founded this model, she did it because her mom suffered from, she's a young tech entrepreneur, and her mom suffered from a rare disease, and which was a genetic mutation that led to her blindness. And my real concern when I read this article is what this author so aptly said. She said, well, this woman's resolution for her mother's condition wasn't to even fix her mother's retina in the womb. It would have been to actually not have her mother be her, because her mother would not have been selected under this type of genetic selection. So, Alyssa, let's start with you. I know you do incredible work in the pro-life space. It's hard to talk about IVF, but I really would love for you to talk about this issue, and feel free to take it.
Yeah, IVF, or in vitro fertilization, has always raised really big ethical issues for the conservative movement. And I think particularly for Christians, because we've had a lot of conservatives come up, President Trump being one of them, who has touted IVF being covered under insurance, given more coverage under insurance. And so we kind of have, even in the conservative movement, this dichotomy of what is IVF and why is it good or why is it bad. So it's important for us to go back to the basics of what IVF is actually used for and the ethical quandaries that have originally surrounded it. Because in that process, in your cycle, you usually have 8 to 10 embryos that are created, human live, genetically unique DNA people that are created. And IVF has always been a quality control and quantity control business, to where most couples only want one baby. And so what do you do with the other 8 to 9 that are created? You either destroy them through abortion, or you donate them to science to be experimented on, or you pay tens of thousands of dollars every month to keep them on ice. And most couples, unfortunately, choose the abortion route when it comes to those. And when it comes to selecting your embryo, it's always been eugenics in form, where you select the gender that you want, you select the healthiest embryo possible. And so we're seeing this trend, like you're talking about, Chelsey, with this new technology of, hey, we could even kind of create the embryo the way we like it and pretend to be God and pretend like we know what's best for children when it comes to how they should be created, how they should be formed. And there's so many ethical quandaries with this, I can't even begin to tell you.
Well, there are, and you're raising so many good points. You know, we're going to hone in a little bit on this, but I'm going to emphasize, because Ethan, I believe you've said you have more libertarian leanings. And so we can talk about that and even sometimes disagree. You know, does the government have any business in this space? And I'm going to say, just to start, that at the end of the day, when we're talking about, we throw the word out there, eugenics, what that means is this concept that dates back really hundreds of years, but really gained traction in the 20s and 30s after Darwin. Think of natural selection, where he said survival of the fittest, and what that translated into culturally was a huge movement, particularly in elite and Ivy League schools, so not abroad, not just in Nazi Germany, which is what we saw the results of the eugenics movement resulted in the Holocaust. But in our elite universities in America, where this idea of survival of the fittest kind of came into the human space, not just through nature or animals that they were talking about, and this idea of quote unquote the unfit populations. And who were they? They were vulnerable populations. They were populations of people who had perhaps mental disorders or struggled with mental disabilities, minorities. Of course, race was top and front and foremost of this movement, eliminating those minorities. That's where Margaret Sanger, who, by the way, I believe was partners with Charles Darwin's cousin, and they lived together, and she started the Planned Parenthood Foundation in New York City. And the precipice for that, and I'm giving a big history lesson here, but the precipice for that was her saying, if we can sell to the Black population and the quote unquote unfit population sterilizing drugs and birth control, we'll be able to help eliminate them. And she said, if we can get their pastors to get on board with this in their neighborhoods and say you can call it family planning and rebrand eugenics, then we can essentially have the types of population and people that we want. It's evil and it's dark, and I'm saying that because when I look at IVF, it looks benign on the surface. We want couples to have children, and you start looking into some of these practices, and it's not benign. It leads to the eradication of certain types of humans. And these humans, after all, are vulnerable. They're embryos. Then they have no choice whether they're selected or not, what their futures are. And that's really an important thing, I think, to note. So, Ethan, I said a lot there. Feel free to take it any direction you want.
Chelsey, it's like you took the talking point out of my mouth about the Margaret Sanger and Planned Parenthood thing. I love pointing that out because it is so shocking and eye-opening. Here's my take on this thing. I think there is like one use case for this technology, and it's extremely narrow, and it's only in cases where somehow they could tell that the child would be born and have mere hours in excruciating pain to live before passing. In that case, I do see the value in it. But as far as screening for other chronic conditions like, diabetes or being born blind or even with Down syndrome or something like that, that feels extremely disturbing to me, because people with all those conditions are capable of leading happy and fulfilling lives and deserve the chance to do that. And this one really hits home for me a little bit because I have a condition called syndactyly, which means that several of my toes are webbed. So this condition actually has no impact on my life. I'm not even a better swimmer for it, which you would think I am, but I'm not. But there's a chance that they could have cast out my embryo for having this quote unquote disorder or abnormality. And, it's a part of who I am now. And I think it's just kind of a goofy little thing, but, it definitely hits home for me on that front a little bit. And I think it's good actually for people to be born quote unquote imperfect or with different advantages. Because part of being a human is accepting our strengths and weaknesses and getting along with people who look and act differently than us. Maybe it would be nice if I was born 6'7" and naturally able to bench 300 pounds. I can't do that, by the way. But I'm actually proud of, I decided that I wanted to be stronger. And so I worked and went to the gym and I accomplished that. And that struggle to overcome the things that we don't like about ourselves and to become better in an organic way, I think is a huge part of the human condition. And I don't know why we would want to weed that out in this perverse process.
That's such an interesting point I never would have thought of, Ethan. I'm glad you raised that true about, we live in such a fast-paced society, where there's not a lot of delayed gratification, right? It's we can just eliminate obstacles, make life as easy, convenient as possible. But is that a good thing overall? No, we want a resilient society. We want a society not of snowflakes. And we talk often as millennials on this show, or now Gen Z, about the resiliency problem with those younger generations of when we forget the helicopter parent. They call them lawnmower parents, where you just remove all obstacles from your children so they have a very cushy life. But that does lead to increased anxiety and depression rates in the younger generation. And overall, the goal of all this being, I could say if there was a theme for the first part of our show here, it's just to cherish humanity that as God's creation, and not necessarily feel the need to play our own version of God and intervene and self-select this or fix that outside of sanctification, which we're called to do biblically, which is a lot of self-work towards leaning towards God, and that happens only through repentance. That only happens through conviction, and we can't create these perfect humans. We can't merge ourselves with technology and make ourselves superhuman in a way that could be ethical. And so I wanted to highlight this again with the caveat that our heart does go out to all those parents who are struggling, and our prayers go out to them. And even for people who did have an IVF experience that they looked back on and said, "Man, that wasn't as ethically done. I had no idea what I was getting into," or "We signed these contracts, we didn't really read the fine print." That does happen, and encourage everybody to pay attention and know this world. We're going to get back after this short break, so don't go anywhere.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Well, welcome back to the Millennial Roundtable, where we are turning our discussion now to a very important case of this United States Supreme Court case term last Wednesday that was heard, and it is where justices were divided over their right, Medicaid's right, quote unquote, to choose Planned Parenthood clinics. And what this is a defunding case that you may have heard make a little bit of headlines. President Trump, probably not by himself or independently, but coordinated with this, did decide to defund aspects of Planned Parenthood from the federal government. So let's put some numbers on it. Planned Parenthood receives about $700 million a year from federal government and Medicaid reimbursement. And that's, of course, for their non-abortion procedures, supposedly, although in some Democrat states and liberal states, they will expend their own taxpayer dollars on abortion procedures. But this is going to be 3% of what Planned Parenthood does. So another stat to understand is 97%, over 97% of all services, quote unquote services, provided by Planned Parenthood is abortion. And so the 3% that is not abortion is what's up for grabs here. This state in South Carolina decided to, because of a lot of drama coming out of Planned Parenthood, things like, we can't say selling fetal tissue parts, but what we can say is they received lots of donations for transporting fetal tissue parts for research to research facilities. They got Medicaid fraud suits coming out of Texas and Louisiana, where they're facing $2 billion worth, that's with a B, of damages for committing Medicaid fraud, among many, many other types of investigations they've faced over the years. They're a walking PR nightmare. And so the fact that North Carolina has said, we don't know that we want our Medicaid funding to go to an establishment like that. The arguments before the court were, what do they have the right to do that, to revoke the funding? And the justices were decided on Wednesday. So, Ethan, we'll start with you. Were you able to track this case at all? And are you familiar with the Medicaid funding aspects of Planned Parenthood? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so this case was brought to my attention when I was prepping for this show. For me, it just highlights a constant theme that you deal with Planned Parenthood. It's always that also provides a lot of women's health services. And I mean, I suppose that's technically true. But I think we have to keep in mind that Planned Parenthood exists to provide abortions. That's what it is. Let's be honest about what Planned Parenthood is. And, the fact of the matter is Planned Parenthood doesn't exist to provide mammograms or prenatal care. You can get that at lots of places. There's only really one place you can go for the abortion, and it's Planned Parenthood. That's why it exists. And so let's just be honest when we're talking about the issue. That's the first thing that stands out to me. And second of all, I think this just comes down to why some sort of national action is necessary on the abortion topic, because we cannot just be content to have it in different states, let different states decide how it goes, because we've tried that, right? But they're always trying to find ways to, you live in South Carolina and your population isn't really in favor of abortion, but we're going to try to push and make sure that your Medicaid allocation is going to fund this. Abortion evangelizes. It's a sort of a perverse religion, and it's not content just to keep to its own corners. And they're really trying to say, no, even if you live in a red state or even a purple state that is common sense on this issue, we want your money to go to this as well. And it just shows you how this particular institution always has to spread its tendrils, even where it's not wanted. And I say, let the people of South Carolina choose if they want their money to go towards it or not.
Well said. Well said. No one is entitled to federal funding and taxpayer dollars. Certainly we aren't, and we're paying our taxes. Yeah. So it does always surprise me. I was a bit surprised. Well, I shouldn't say that. Of course, Planned Parenthood is fighting to keep their Medicaid funding because they're facing disastrous damages in all these Medicaid fraud cases coming out of other states, which I think, by the way, should be enough cause alone for a state to look at their practices in other states and say, wow, you've been accused of very serious Medicaid fraud allegations, and that might not be something we want to continue to funding. I would think it's well within the state's purview to decide where and when and how they spend their budget money, and which, of course, is the issue the Supreme Court will look at. Alyssa, your thoughts on this case?
Yeah, I think you and Ethan are better qualified to talk about the legal aspects of this, obviously, given your lawyer minds. But from a moral aspect, I am 100% in favor of states saying no to taxpayer funding, to Medicare benefits, all of those things. And especially for states like Illinois, where I live, blue states, abortion care is completely unregulated. And Representative Hallbrook recently gave this speech on the House floor in Illinois in Springfield, and he noted that all of our abortion clinics here are completely unregulated. There are no inspections, there's no requirements for doctors to have admitting privileges in case something goes wrong. And since 2019, there's no mandate for a coroner to investigate if a woman dies during an abortion procedure. There's no regulation whatsoever. And in addition to this, we just had a crazy case come up out of Illinois where Dr. Keith Reisinger-Kindle left half of the baby inside of a woman, which led to severe complications. She eventually had to go to the hospital, get the rest of the baby removed. And so this just highlights that Planned Parenthood, from all aspects, is completely divulged of any right to any kind of funding. They have disqualified themselves from being considered a legitimate healthcare facility. And of course, they claim, oh, we do cancer screenings and we give prenatal care, all of these things. We provide ultrasounds, which in fact you have to pay for. But like you were saying, Chelsey, the percentage that actually goes to those things is so minute that it's not their biggest income. Their biggest income, like Ethan was saying, they exist to perform abortions. They exist to kill babies. And states have absolutely every right to say no to them.
They do. And I'm going to put a few more stats up here because I do think I hear that what you're alluding to, Alyssa, that concern over, well, what affordable services do they provide to communities that are underserved, maybe even in Medicare deserts without access to hospitals. We don't want to see people harmed. And that's kind of been a lie that we've seen out there that, we as compassionate people want others to have access to affordable health care. So just to let you know, if you don't already, in the state of South Carolina alone, which is a decent sized state, but not huge, they already have 200 publicly funded healthcare clinics. And so don't necessarily believe the lie that Planned Parenthood is the only one providing Medicaid services out there. There are many. I think there's 10,000 total in some of the areas that are looking to defund Planned Parenthood. And if you didn't know, while I'm outing Planned Parenthood over here, allegedly, we'll just say allegedly to cover ourselves, but Planned Parenthood has pivoted in recent years. So if you're not aware, Planned Parenthood has pivoted a little bit away from abortion, although they're still, very predominantly practicing abortion in the states that they can. But their biggest moneymaker in most recent years is gender transition surgeries for children. And so that is something that they've started focusing on, and they have become the second largest provider of dangerous gender transitioning drugs in the U.S. They admit to giving them to minors across the country. And then when South Carolina said they didn't want children to have access to these drugs, Planned Parenthood lobby came out in support of it. And so this is a growing practice area for Planned Parenthood. If you need to know that or want to know that, they're just always going, they follow the money, and that's where they're going. So we should be looking out for these justices to issue an opinion on whether or not South Carolina has the right to say we're not going to put our taxpayer dollars into an institution like Planned Parenthood or not. Be looking out for that. I'll say probably end of June is when that would come out. But go ahead, Ethan, real quickly, in a minute we have left, tell our viewers where they can follow you and support you.
Awesome. Yeah. So you can find me on X at ERWatson13. I post all my articles and appearances there. I'm trying to grow my following. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, we so appreciate you, Ethan, and your perspective as always. And Alyssa, where can our listeners go to find out more about your work?
Yeah, you can follow Illinois Family Institute on social media. You can follow Self-Evident Podcast on social media. I work with both of them. And thank you so much for having me.
Always good to have you guys. And thank you so much. Don't forget to go to pointofview.net where you can read about our topics or more. Like us on Facebook, Point of View Radio. Have a great day.
The Bible tells us not to worry, and yet there is a lot of worrying stuff in our world today. Thankfully, the Bible doesn't stop at telling us not to worry. God gives us a next step. He says we need to pray. But sometimes even knowing what to pray can be difficult. And that is why Point of View has relaunched our Pray for America movement, a series of weekly emails to guide you in prayer for our nation. Each week, you'll receive a brief update about a current issue affecting Americans, along with a written prayer that you can easily share with others. We'll also include a short free resource for you in each email so you can learn more about the issue at hand. Will you commit to pray for America? Go to pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner at the top of the page to subscribe. Again, that's pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in America. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.